I'm happy to be with you all. My name is Meiko. I am a founder of Guerrilla Food. We spell it Guerrilla like the rebel soldier because we started off by operating a guerrilla food truck. Well, that's what we called it. The official name of it now is the Pink Flamingo, and it's located in North Corktown, a block away from Brother Nature Produce, which some of you may be familiar with. And that's kind of how I started getting into cooking here in Detroit. When I came in 2011, was through working as a farmhand at Brother Nature Produce. And I was really, I think the main things that I got out of it were being connected to people and then being more connected to the land. And they have very little, they have tractors and stuff, but all the greens they cut by hand with scissors. So you're literally down in the dirt on your knees, with your scissors. And so it's kind of nice. I really give credit to farmers who are spending all their days working, on their hands and knees and in the dirt, because it's really physical work. But I would go once a week and harvest greens in exchange for food. And so an extension of that, I was able to operate a small food truck called the Pink Flamingo. And we do a farm to table meal every Thursday there. At least we did pre-COVID. And it's outdoors. Every week is a different menu so that we can focus on using seasonal ingredients and really keep it as local as possible. So all our salad is coming from Brother Nature Produce. As much of our produce as possible is coming from neighborhood farms, D-Town Farm, Keeper in Detroit. We get some stuff from Fisheye Farms, coriander, corn, wine, oil. There's a bunch of people that we get stuff from. So that was the original project. And then we kind of grew out of our commissary kitchen in Hamtramck and moved to this larger kitchen space where I'm at now. We are on Woodward between 6 and 7 miles. I'll give you a little tour, backwards tour. So this is the kitchen. We call this place Pink Flamingo to go. You can see all of our mess in the background. Phoebe's back there too. We're prepping. We do Friday deliveries and curbside pickups. Right now we're just doing limited service. So all of our food is pre-made and pre-packaged for you to be able to take home and reheat and eat throughout the week. And I was going to say we primarily do vegetarian food, but that's not really true. We definitely focus on using vegetables as the main piece of the meal, but we use fish, we use meat, and we use, various products as well. I want to talk a little bit more about the food that we do and our approach to cooking as we cook together. But I just want to check in with everyone, and I'm not sure who's going to be cooking alongside, but if you could put it in the chat or wave or something, that way I kind of have a sense of who's going to be cooking alongside. All right, cool. I'm going to change my view so that I can see more people at the same time. All right.
Good to see you, Winston.
So we decided that if you have things already prepped, the recipe says to have garlic chopped and onions chopped and squash chopped up. If you've done all that, if you've done all your mise en place, great. But we're gonna start lowest common denominator and just do every piece sort of together. So to give everyone a second to get their bearing and get everything organized, I would say make sure you have a pot, make sure you have all of your ingredients, so all your vegetables, your spices if you're using the spices, coconut milk, vegetable broth. If you don't have vegetable broth, fine, we're gonna do something else. In the meantime, your onions, your garlic, and then a chopping board and a knife, and probably a vegetable peeler if you have one. And I'm going to just talk about all the different ingredients and the basic theme for how to make this recipe. But if you want, the best place to start now would be to peel your onions, peel your garlic. If you're using ginger or turmeric, peel those things, and you can start chopping. I always like to start with, even when we're doing prep in the kitchen, I like to start with always having onions cut, always having garlic cut, and we just we'll make a bunch, put it in the food processor to mince it all up, and then we have it. And then we just use a little bit as we need it. And someone's asking about the spices. It's okay if you don't have the spices. If you have any of those spices as a powder, you can use that also. If you don't, you can use, we'll talk about it in a second, but you can use other spices. This is just one combination that's kind of fun to use. But like I said, all those things in powder form, not mustard powder I wouldn't use, but definitely coriander and cumin. Or if you have paprika, that would be great too. And then turmeric as well. So let's get our onion and our garlic. And like I said, if you have other, if you have ginger, I know ginger's not on the recipe, but also your chili, you can go ahead and get your chilies chopped. If you don't have fresh, again, I'm gonna keep my board down so you can see what I'm doing. If you don't have fresh, that's totally fine. You can just use a little bit of extra cayenne powder, or if you have another kind of, dried red pepper flakes, that would also work.
We have another question. Jocelyn's wondering if we can sub curry powder for the leaves.
Sure, definitely, yeah. Yeah, you can definitely sub curry powder for the leaves. I don't have any curry leaves. I'm just going to be using all the dried spices. And then what I like to do is, once I have my coconut milk mixed in at the end, then if I want to add more seasoning, then that's a good time to add, your dried powdered spices like curry powder or more cumin or something. Because, the seeds, when we keep them whole, then it's a different experience than if you're grinding them. One thing we could do is, toast all the seeds and then grind them up. But here we're keeping them whole because it's kind of fun to have a bite of the seeds while you're eating.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going to put my garlic to the side. I'm just going to leave everything on my board.
I have another question for you, Meiko. Marguerite is saying that she cannot eat or use hot peppers, but is just double checking that the other spices will be enough.
Oh,
taste-wise.
So I think so. If you have fresh ginger, I would say that would be a nice thing to add. And you can add the ginger once we start cooking the onions. And then this is really going to be a taste as you go recipe where you can adjust the seasonings to your liking. And so if you're finding that it doesn't have enough seasoning, then you can just add more. But those would be my suggestions. Add ginger and then be prepared to maybe add some more dried spices. All right, so I'm using some fresh turmeric because I have it.
And then just out of frame, you have a compost bowl, yeah, to put your food scraps?
So here's my compost bowl. We started it earlier for our prep. And so I just put all my garlic skins in there. I chopped my onions earlier. Here are my onions. I chopped them kind of finely, but you don't have to chop them that fine if you don't want. And yeah, I'm just putting all my vegetable scraps right into my bowl so that I don't have to just keep it all here, and then I use a bigger bucket later and take it to my compost pile. But while we talk about compost, I do want to mention one other thing, because you do have two options while you're prepping your vegetables. So you can either just throw away your scraps, or if you want, you can use your scraps to make a vegetable stock. So the things that you would want to use would be like the outer peels of the onion. Some people say that the skin can be kind of bitter and can make your broth bitter. So if you're using the skin, you just want to do like a quick boil on your stock, maybe just like 20 minutes. But if you're going to do like a longer slow boil, then add those at the end. I'm taking my carrot and I'm going to peel my carrots, and I'm keeping all the skin. Of course, you don't have to peel your carrots if you don't want, but I like to, because then I can take all the carrot skin and put it into a pot and start a stock. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I can find the pot. So,
and then we have another question asking if they're supposed to chop the jalapenos.
oh yeah, good question. Yes. So you can chop your jalapenos. Again, if you want to have like little containers of everything separate, because once we get started cooking, it's going to be kind of one thing after another, you can. Or you can just do like what I'm doing on my cutting board, where you can just have a pile of everything separated so that you can put one thing at a time. But you can go ahead and chop your jalapenos, leave the seeds in if you like spicy, and take the seeds out if you want to keep it a little milder.
Is squash skin good for stock too?
That's a good question. I don't use squash skin for stock, but to be honest, I've actually never tried. It just strikes me as being like very hard. But if you're curious about it, you could try. As far as I know, there's nothing toxic in squash skin, like, delicata squash. Actually, this squash that I have here is a squash that was grown in Banglatown in Hamtramck, and it has a really thin skin. This one's kind of old and messed up looking, so I'm going to peel the parts that look bad, but I'm going to keep the skin on this one and just cook it with the skin on it. So yeah, I don't know, like sweet potato skins, squash skins, I never personally save them to add to stock, but they might actually do something. I'm not really sure. If anyone else knows, feel free to chime in. Yeah, someone said butternut squash skin, totally, you can eat that one. Any of the thin skins, even some of them, they just don't taste very good, right? I like sweet potato skins, but a lot of the kabocha squash skin, I don't ever really enjoy eating that one. All right, so how is everybody doing on chopping their base? So that would be the onions, garlic, if you're using ginger, chilies. How's everyone doing on that part?
Maybe give us a thumbs up either on your video or, yeah, there we go. Cool.
Yep. If you need more time, that's fine. We're going to keep going. We won't move too far ahead. Okay. Garlic is actually a great thing to so there's the active compound in garlic, I think it's called allicin, is activated when you let the garlic, after you cut it, if you let it sit. So some people recommend chopping it and then not using it right away because it allows the allicin to activate, and then the like antifungal, antibacterial, antiviral properties that are in garlic are like that much more effective. So that's kind of a cool thing.
I have two quick questions for you about broth. What do you have thoughts on kale stalks and herbs in your broth?
Yes, that was actually going to be my next thing, so I'm glad you asked.
Great.
So right now, all I have in my pot for my stock is like this little sad carrot skin and the top and bottom of a daikon radish. But the next thing I was going to do was do my kale. So this is beautiful kale from Keep Growing Detroit. Thank you very much. Two things. The stem can be used for something like a stew because you're cooking it and it's going to get soft over time. But if you want, which is what I'm going to do today, I'm going to use the stems in my stock just for like what we talked about, have a little bit more flavor and nutrition in the stock. So I'm just breaking it with my hands. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about this, but have you ever heard that like greens taste sweeter when you tear them by hand versus cutting them with a knife?
Janetta says yes.
Yeah, that's what my mom says. So
yeah, we got a couple yeses.
Cool. So I don't know why. I know there's like oxidation that happens when you chop lettuce, for example. But I don't know. Some of these things, I'm sure there's like a scientific explanation, but it's kind of nice to know that like it doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah.
The explanation is like we can operate on that level, or we can also operate on the more like spiritual level of just like feeling our food and feeling our vegetables and like listening to them and paying attention to them, and we can understand them on that level without necessarily being able to say like, oh, it's this molecule and that molecule and this chemical doing that. Like that stuff is great too, but there's we can look at these things on different levels, I guess. The other thing we're going to add to our stock pot are the mushroom. Oh, actually two things. If you're using ginger, by all means throw the ginger skins into your pot. I forgot with my turmeric and I just put it straight in my compost, but that would be a great thing to add to your little stock pot. And if you have, what's it called? Sorry, if you have mushrooms and you're ready to start chopping or slicing your mushrooms, you can go ahead and grab those, and I'm gonna go grab mine for my stock pot. And also, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my recipe that I sent you, and this was before I talked to Lola about the greens, so I don't know if all of you do have greens or not. You definitely don't need them for this recipe, but it is nice to be able to just throw as many vegetables into one dish as possible. So sorry if that wasn't on the ingredient list. I'm gonna go grab my mushrooms. If you have any more questions, please keep adding them to the chat. Spinach is great. You just add the spinach at the very end so that it doesn't overcook and get too mushy.
Also, a quick note is that this is our first time doing a cook along class like this, so we might go over an hour, and there will be a point at which Meiko can share instructions for folks who need to leave at that point.
Did I miss anything?
No, I was just sharing what we talked about the other day about how the class might go over an hour, and if folks need to leave at the hour point, then you'll give some quick instructions for what folks can do to finish up the recipe.
Yeah, the good thing about this recipe is it's really more work on the front end, and then once it's cooking, there's not so much left to do besides just let the vegetables cook. So yeah.
Yes, and also Marguerite made a good point. We are recording this class also, so you'll be able to see the part that you weren't able to stay for on our YouTube page if need be too.
Yeah.
What mushrooms do you like to use?
Oh, I love shiitakes. I like cremini mushrooms. These are just like regular button mushrooms. I really like to buy mushrooms from Vincent at Eastern Market, Give and Grow Mushrooms. I think they have a really cool selection and they grow a lot of their stuff. And I don't know how many of you know Ian. I wish I knew his last name.
Sawyer?
Marsha Sawyer, Ian Sawyer. He's growing mushrooms, and I'm sure, I don't know if any of you all are growing mushrooms, but you know, that would be the best way to do it, is to like use the ones that you're growing yourself. But yeah, oyster mushrooms, lion's mane mushrooms. If you want like a really like medicinal mushroom, you know, something like lion's mane is really good for the brain and for your nerves. Using a mix, portobellos, anything really. Oh, nice! There's a mushroom growing class. You can use anything. I would say if you have a variety, great. And if you have something that's a little bit stronger, like a danko shiitake or a maitake or a lion's mane mushroom, that would be really great. But if not, these will work just fine. All right, so I'm just gonna put my mushrooms, all my stems are now in my pot. So this is a good time. I don't think I really have anything else to add here. If you have extra vegetable scraps that you want to add, what we do is when we're prepping, we just put everything into bags in the freezer and keep it all in the freezer. And then when we're ready to cook, we take as much out as we want. One of my favorite things to use are corn cobs. That really does a lot for stock. But you can go ahead and put some water in your pot and throw it on the stove. What else? I wanted to mention something else. Oh, if you're looking for like another easy thing to do for stock, especially if you're thinking about like nutrition and minerals during the winter time, kombu or kelp is a really great thing to use. You can buy it you probably could buy it at Whole Foods or like other grocery stores, but any Asian grocery store will have it. And it's a little bit salty, right? Because it's from the ocean and it has a little bit of like a sea sort of smell. But it doesn't lend it's not like a fishy taste or anything. And it grows when you put it in the water. It's called kombu, Kombu. Otherwise, sometimes it's just called kelp. Kombu is like the Japanese name for it. And it's really delicious. Miso soup, the base of miso soup is called kombu dashi, and that's usually made with bonito flakes, which is a type of fish, and kombu. And it really adds like important minerals that sometimes we're not getting, and it adds another layer of flavor that's really nice. So if you want to try something new, I would recommend checking that out because it's a really cool vegetable. And in general, like eating sea vegetables is so good for you, just in terms of the minerals that are available in the sea vegetables, stuff that we don't really get enough of sometimes.
I have two questions for you. Patricia's wondering how much curry powder should she use if they're not using curry leaves?
So if I would say to start with a teaspoon and then add more as you need to. I just want to double check because like I can't see what a lot of people are doing. Does everyone have, I just want to know if everyone has all their like onions and garlic and stuff chopped up and if they have started on any of their vegetables, especially the mushrooms and any like hard vegetables like carrots, or I guess mostly carrots would be like my question.
Seeing some thumbs up.
Okay, cool. Great. Today I'm going to use daikon. So I'm using carrots, which I chopped already, and then I'm going to use daikon radish, these like beautiful purple daikon radishes, and then this squash that I told you about, and then the greens. But of course, you know, you can use anything you want. And I know I mentioned in the recipe that I like to cook my vegetables in batches. I'll start with my hardest vegetables, which in general, yay, purple daikon, which in general are things like carrots, and then things like potato, sweet potato, some squashes, right? Like a really dense squash will take longer to cook, obviously, than a more watery squash, or something like zucchini or bell peppers. Those will all take a shorter amount of time. So I'm just keeping everything in a little like separate so that I can pace how I'm adding everything in. And I just want to mention about the different vegetables, because we're going to start cooking in a second. And while we cook, we're going to come back and finish chopping everything. So we're going to do a little bit of multitasking so that we can kind of keep things moving. And if you have a sous chef or a partner with you in the kitchen, then great. One person can kind of continue on the chopping stuff. But if not, like I said, we'll just kind of go back and forth while things are cooking on the stove. And that being said, for this next step, you're going to need your pot and a little bit of oil to toast the seeds in. So what I'm going to do is take my pot that I already used, so sorry it's a little bit dirty. I'm just going to put enough oil in here so that there's a thin coating. So I know I said 3 tablespoons in the recipe. I'm probably using like 1 tablespoon to start. And then I'm going to put my pot on the stove and throw all of my seeds into the pot while it's on like medium heat.
Meiko, Janetta's wondering if you can add zucchini to this recipe.
Definitely. So what I would do is I would add zucchini at the end, because you want to use all the quickest cooking vegetables at the end. But yeah, you can definitely use zucchini. This was, you know, we're trying to use winter vegetables right now, so that's why we're focusing so much on all these roots. But honestly, you can use anything, tomatoes, corn, any type of pepper. Okay, I'm gonna add my seeds. I'm not measuring anything with a teaspoon because I like to use my hand. So I'm just gonna put like a little bit of my hand and throw it in the pot. If you're not using whole spices, then, seeds in the, with a little bit of oil. Just a little bit of oil in the pan, and then the seeds go in. We're waiting for the seeds to start to spit and pop a little bit. If you're not using whole seeds, then what you're gonna do is just put your oil down and then go ahead and add your onions. All right, so I'm using coriander, cumin, and mustard seeds. Fennel seeds would be great. I love fennel seeds. You can definitely use fennel seeds. Another thing that would be nice if you're going for more like an Indian spice profile would be fenugreek would be really good. And I guess there were 2 things. Like, one thing for black mustard seeds, you could use yellow mustard seeds if you have it, not the powder, just the seed. And if you don't have those, then don't worry about it. This recipe would be really good even just with only cumin seeds. And if you're only doing cumin seeds, then you might want to use a little bit more so that you're like making up for the flavor. Okay, so I learned a trick with mustard recently, which was that from my godmother. She said, if you ever make a stew, she said stew specifically, but I think you could probably, well, you do it with a soup too, depending on your ingredients. She said, if you ever make a stew and it doesn't taste very good, just add a teaspoon of mustard at the end and it'll fix everything. And I tried it one time and it actually kind of works. I think just because of like the acid in it, I don't know, the flavor. So if you have regular mustard, don't use it now. If you need to use it at the end, you can. I don't know if you're going to need to go there, but you'll be able to tell once we get to that point. So you don't want your seeds to burn, which is why we're keeping the heat on medium. I'm hearing like a little sizzle in my pan right now, but I really am waiting for the seeds to start to pop. They kind of start to jump a little bit, and that's when you know it's time to add your onions. So just be prepared that that's going to be the next step. If you are getting antsy waiting for that, you can always start on peeling whatever vegetables or prepping whatever vegetables you still have left to chop. And I guess the only other thing I want to say, I think my seeds are popping.
Right on cue.
So my seeds are starting to pop. So I'm going to add my onions. And with the onions, I'm going to add a pinch of salt.
Meiko, will potato, butternut squash, and parsnip cook about at the same rate?
Cook the parsnip first. You can kind of feel it. The parsnip is like really dense and hard compared to like a potato. I would do the parsnip first.
Okay.
Okay, so a little bit of salt I'm putting in. If you do low salt, if you're trying to do low salt cooking, then don't use any salt, but the salt helps release water that's in the onions. And also when you salt things earlier, then you don't have to salt as much later.
Yeah, I was reading recently that like adding a bunch of salt at the end of the recipe can actually like shock your taste buds a little bit and lower your or I guess raise your salt tolerance.
Wait,
have you heard that too? What'd you say?
Oh, I missed what you said.
Oh, a friend of mine posted recently who's a chef. She was saying that adding all your salt at the end of cooking your dish will end up actually like shocking your taste buds and making your sensitivity to salt lower.
Oh, interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. So yeah, another reason. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so my onions are cooking. I don't want them to burn, so again, we're keeping things on about medium heat, and we're waiting for the onions to start to turn translucent before we add our other vegetables. Another like thing to think about when we're talking about like hard vegetables or like quicker cooking vegetables, you know, of course, this might sound a little stupid to say, but like, of course, the shape and size of your vegetable is also going to affect cooking time. So you could also like chop your carrots small and then chop your other stuff a little bit bigger, put it all in at the same time. And in general, I would also just say that this is a forgiving recipe in terms of like, if you cook this for a long time, it's not going to get worse. So there's not so much harm in having things, you know, if you're not really sure, oh, it's going to take 5 minutes or 7 minutes, it's not going to get so bad. When I make this recipe with sweet potato, I notice that if I make it and then save it and then reheat it, when I reheat it, a lot of the sweet potato will break down and it just changes the flavor and the texture in kind of a nice way. It turns the soup sort of orange. So, you know, if some of your vegetables break apart a little bit more or break down. You know, that's not necessarily such a bad thing.
And with soups and stews, doesn't the flavor continue to develop like in your fridge for over a couple days?
Yeah, especially with things like this where we're adding spices. It's gonna change flavor as it sits. So yeah, definitely. Okay, so I would say keep on chopping vegetables while you're keeping an eye on your onions. And please, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and add them to the chat. Or like say them out loud. I don't know what the protocol is.
Either way works, because I know that also it's hard to cook and also have your hands on the keyboard at the same time. It can make your keyboard messy. So whatever works best for folks. Could you remind us when to add the fresh ginger?
Yes. So we're going to add all of that after we add our, after the onions cook a little bit more, that's when we'll add the ginger, the garlic, the chilies, all of that. So we're probably getting pretty close. My onions are pretty close to being just about translucent. I'm gonna check them right now, actually.
Could you also share a bit how like the different ways of cooking onions might affect your soup or stew? Like if you're like translucent onions versus caramelized onions versus browned onions.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll answer that in just a second. My onion, I'm gonna show you what my pan looks like right now. So my pan is a little bit on the dry side, which is fine. I have a little bit of there's some brown going on, as you can tell. Things are starting to get a little bit crispy, and it smells good. And my onions some of them are translucent and some of them are still white. And so I'm going to go ahead and add my other allium. So I'm gonna add my chilies. I have a little bit of green onion, just because it's what I had around, and I'm gonna add my garlic if I can find it. Oh yeah, it's right there. I'm gonna add my garlic and my turmeric, and then I'm gonna mix it up. My pan is a little bit dry because, like I said, I only added a tablespoon of oil at first. So I can either add a little more oil or I can add some vegetable broth just to make sure that stuff doesn't stick. And in this case, I'm gonna add some more oil because we're gonna add some mushrooms, and I don't wanna put too much liquid in the pan. You could also use wine, would be great. I've never really had wine, like white wine and coconut milk together. Like those are kind of different parts of the flavor spectrum. But you know, maybe that could work. I know some people who like to deglaze with a vinegar. But like I said, since I just used a little bit of oil at the first time, I'm gonna add a little bit more so that stuff can continue to brown. And that's really what we're doing with the onions and these other things that we're adding right now, is we're trying to build up a base of flavor. I don't know how many of you ever make a sofrito, but that's like the same type of thing, or like the way a lot of Creole cooking starts with green bell pepper and celery and carrots. That's what we're building right now, is a base of flavor. And so the reason why we want to brown cook the onions until they're soft and translucent, and maybe I get a little bit of brownness on them, is again, we're just trying to build in some flavor, since we're not cooking with meat here, right? Meat, adding meat, having the meat fat, really easy way to get some flavor. And so this is just another way to do that. If you wanted to go and like caramelize your onions all the way, you could. Then you would end up with something a lot more jammy and not as, how do you say it? Yeah, it would be like a softer kind of base. This is gonna have a little bit of bite left to it. So it kind of just ends up being a preference. And I know someone asked about how much water to add if you're like mixing your stuff. You just want enough so that nothing's sticky. So at this point, we're really just trying to get the heat to like cook everything. So we're not trying to burn anything. We just want everything to be cooked through and a little bit brown. And this is not going to take very long for the chilies and the garlic and everything to cook. So I'm going to bring my pan back over so that you can see where things are at. It smells really good. So here's where things are standing right now for me. So everything's a little bit brown. I have like a little bit of brown on the bottom of my pan. I'm not worried about that because once I put broth in and stir it, all of that will come up and then be flavor inside of the soup. But I don't want any black or burnt, and I don't want to have any burnt smells. So again, that's where like a little bit of water broth could come in. It's kind of hard to tell just by looking if the garlic is cooked or not. But it should really only take about 30 seconds to a minute or so for the garlic to cook, and it's going to continue to soften as we cook the stew. So I'm going to take my dry spices and I'm going to add them. So for those of you who didn't use seeds, now would be the time to use whatever dry spices you're using. Coriander, cumin, paprika. If you have like a seasoning mix like Mrs. Dash or something, you could use that. I'm going to use turmeric and then a little bit of red pepper flakes. These are just dried chilies from gardens from last year, just like all the chilies we got. We just dried them, some in the oven, and then we ground them up. So I'm going to add some of that. And then I'm going to add some turmeric. And again, just trying to stir everything so that nothing's sticking and burning. Now that we have dry spices in the pan, things have to move a little bit quicker. So I'm going to go ahead and add my mushrooms now to the pan and stir everything up. The mushrooms will release liquid, but they might not release liquid right away. So again, if you're seeing burning or dark, you can just take a splash of water or vinegar and add it right now. I'll show you what I have. So I've mixed my mushrooms into my pot, and there's a lot of spices that are like sticking to the bottom of my pot. So I'm gonna add just a splash so that my mushrooms are not sticking and all my spices are able to lift off from the bottom of the pan. And then this is going to go back on the stove. Again, we're keeping about medium heat. And we're just cooking the mushrooms until they release their liquid. You'll be able to tell because they'll shrink dramatically. And if you don't have mushrooms, you can always skip this step. But the mushrooms add kind of a cool like flavor and also a different type of texture which is sort of fun when you're eating a bunch of vegetables. It's nice to have like some different textures. Maybe you're not that type of person. If you are, then you know what I'm talking about.
When you're making your broth, how much water do you use? Is there like a ratio?
Good question.
Or do you just make sure they're covered?
He could tell you what the ratio should be, but I definitely don't know. I totally just do it by feel and by how much I need, right? So like if I have to make a lot, then I'll try to okay, let me put it this way. So you definitely want your vegetables covered with water. And in terms of like quantity, I would say if you have a third, like let's say 1/3 is your vegetable matter, and then 2/3 is water, you're gonna get a pretty nice stock pretty quickly. If you have a lot less, then it's just going to take longer and you're going to get a lighter flavored broth. And you can tell by the colors. So for example, like here's one that I made earlier. And this is actually the second round. I used all the vegetables. I had like leek skins and carrot peels and like the butt of a cabbage. And I like had everything in the pot, maybe about 2/3 up the pot, and then I put water in. So I had a really, really rich broth. And then I took all that and I cooked it down again because I needed more broth, and I ended up with a lighter one. So it just depends on like how much flavor you're trying to get. And you can taste it and see. But yeah, I'm sorry I can't give you a more specific answer.
And then I answered yes to onion. Oh, sorry. Sorry, what'd you say?
I was going to say, one of our principles is like we don't measure stuff.
Nice.
Like, it makes it harder to replicate things, but it's kind of nice to just work with what you have and then use your like senses. And I would say, especially with things like this, it's pretty forgiving in terms of, you know, how much of this or how much of that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
And was there another question? I'm just cutting my squash right now. While just like as a note to everybody, my mushrooms are cooking pretty good, but they haven't released all their liquid yet. So I'm just gonna keep chopping my vegetables, and right now I'm working on my squash. And sorry, what was that question?
We have a couple questions. Jocelyn was also wondering about adding onion skins, and I answered yes to onion skins in broth. And I was also going to add that I like to put both ends in the broth, and sometimes like there'll be a little bit of, if you put like the root side in, that sometimes a little bit of like dirt will come off of it, but you can always, it usually settles to the bottom, and you can always just not pour that part in.
Definitely, yeah, I think that's all great. I think that's all of that sounds great. Okay. I agree, the stuff sort of settles. You can just be a little bit careful when you're straining.
Yeah. There's two questions I'm going to get to at the end, and then Janetta is just double checking that it's cool to add seaweed to her broth.
Yes. Yep. I would say definitely. Oh, is it like a different type of seaweed, or is it just?
Wakame?
Oh, I guess you could. So typically you eat wakame, you eat it. And so when you make broth with kombu, you discard it. Well, let me take that back. You can actually eat the kombu too. You can like cook it with some sugar and some soy sauce and garlic and make like a little treat. But typically wakame, you will like eat it. And so you could put it in your broth. But usually that one's used for like if you make a salad, or even when you make a soup. I like to use that one in soup as like an actual vegetable. So yeah, there's no reason not to, but there's probably better seaweeds to use in general, and save that one for like eating. Or you could use it in your broth and take it out and eat it, right?
Sure. Dion's wondering when you add the ginger.
Oh shoot, I'm sorry. So the ginger is added with if you're using fresh root, it should have been added with your garlic and your chilies. So if you're adding it now with the onions, you run the risk of it not cooking as much, and then you could just end up with more like gingery bites, right? As opposed to like a deeper flavor base. So you have two options. You could either just add it now and hope for the best. I'm just checking on my mushroom mix. It would probably still be fine. If you're gonna add it with your mushrooms, you might wanna add just a tiny bit of oil so that it can fry a little bit. Or you could cook it separately and then add it, or you could add it later, like once you have it cooked separately. Yeah, it would sort of be like, let's say you have garlic, and instead of adding it, so if you add raw garlic at the end of a recipe, it's going to be a lot more raw garlicky flavored than it would be if you add it at the beginning and you cook it down and sweat it. Same with ginger. If you add it now or later, you're just running the risk of it being like a stronger ginger flavor. That could overpower the recipe a little bit. Sorry about that. I should have mentioned that. Okay, so here's my update. Please let me know where you all are at if you have any other questions. So my mushrooms have cooked down. They're pretty like limp, and they've gotten really gotten a lot smaller. And I also should say that if you're using curry powder, now would be a good time to add it. If you didn't already add it with your other dry spices. So now that my mushrooms are cooked, now is the time to add all the root vegetables. So I'm gonna start with my carrots. And because I'm just gonna start with the carrots, and then I'm gonna pour enough broth. I have such a little amount of carrot over so that everything is covered. And I'm gonna put a lid on this and turn the heat up. And so the goal here, I know we're getting low on time, so I'm going to talk about all that in a second. But right now what we're doing is we are trying to get the carrots cooked, and I'm turning the heat up because I want to do that kind of quickly. You have two options. You can go ahead and add all your vegetables now to the broth, or what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wait about 3 to 4 minutes until the carrots just get a little bit softer. And then I'm gonna add my other vegetables, just because like I said, my squash is like not very dense, and I just know it's gonna cook a lot quicker than the carrots are. I'm wondering, Lola, should I do the whole like what comes next if you have to leave, or should we do it like a check to see if anyone does have to go right at 7?
Yeah, I guess could you either, well, I guess if folks do have to go, I would encourage you to definitely check the video on YouTube. But if you do have to go and you're cooking along with Meiko right now, could you just give me like a thumbs up or a comment in the chat if you have to go but would like to know how to finish up your stew that's in progress?
This next part is easy. It's just we did like the most labor-intensive part.
Okay. I don't see any notes or thumbs up from folks, so I think we're good actually.
Okay, cool. All right, so while we let the first batch of vegetables cook in the vegetable broth, does anyone have any questions?
I was just wondering, I'm not using carrots. I just have squash and sweet potatoes. So how much stock should I put in if those are like the only veggies that I'm adding?
You said if those are the only vegetables you're adding?
Yeah, that, and then I have spinach too.
And you said you put them all in already?
I haven't put them in yet.
Okay, so here's the thing with the stock, or here's the thing with the liquid. So the more broth you put in, the more watery the soup is going to be.
Okay.
The less broth you put in, then the more coconut you put in, then the thicker it's going to be and the richer it's going to be. So it it depends on two things. It depends on the coconut milk you're using, and it depends on your preference. So what I like to do is, you can always add more broth later, but you can't really take it out. So
yeah, that makes sense.
what I like to do is I like to just cover the vegetables with liquid, with the broth. That way they can cook and sort of steam in the pan. Even if it's like a little bit under that and you have your lid on, everything will steam and cook. That way I can control how much coconut milk, and then if it's too rich, too thick, I can always add more broth afterward.
Cool, that makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions or comments? My carrots are boiling over here, so I'm going to add my other vegetables in just a minute, but I want to see if there are any other questions or comments first.
A question we had earlier was asking, why do we toast the spice seeds first? And does that relate to what you're saying about building a flavor profile early on with the onions?
Yeah, I mean, so there's two ways you could do it. There's like a very, I can't think of the name of it right now, but a very common finishing touch for dishes is to cook seeds in a little bit of oil, and then you put some on top of your finished dish. And then you can even like add a little bit of garlic or a little bit of ginger or something and kind of fry all that and then use it as a topping. And not just on a stew or a soup, you could use that on like lentils or on, chicken or something. So that's like one technique. And you're welcome to do that here as well if you want to like double up. But yeah, the reason why we're adding them at the beginning is just to try to like build in some flavor to start with. And if you were to only add it at the end, then everything hasn't been boiling together, and like you might not have as much of the flavor from the seeds. And like I mentioned earlier, because we're keeping the seeds whole, they're not necessarily giving as much flavor to the broth as if I had like dry toasted the seeds, put them in a mortar and pestle, ground them up, and then added them. That's another way to do to add flavor, and another thing that you could do with a stew super easily. And so this is just one way of many to use seeds, use whole spices in a recipe.
Cool. Jocelyn's wondering, how long should you boil your broth before you strain it?
So I would say minimum 20 minutes you want to simmer. If you don't have that much time, then you can definitely go less. Like if you didn't have broth and you're using your broth in this recipe, then you can like take what you need out and then keep on cooking what you still have in your pot, maybe adding a little bit more water if you need to. When we make broth in the restaurant, we probably cook it for we bring it to a boil and then we let it simmer for maybe like 30 minutes. And if it's not looking very dark, like if it's looking like, oh, we don't have that much vegetable matter in there, then we'll let it cook for longer. And then we'll even let it sit overnight before we strain it if we can, to do two things: to help everything settle, and also just, again, trying to get a little bit more flavor out of all those scraps. So short answer, I would say about 20 minutes of simmering.
Jack,
carrots to see where things are in terms of like tenderness. They're still pretty hard, so I'm gonna hold off on adding the other stuff for just like a minute longer. But like I said, I have all my stuff prepped. Okay, any other questions?
Yes, Jacqueline asked, she's saying she bought some coconut cream for this, but also has some light coconut milk left from a doll that she made yesterday. Can she use that, or will the cream be better?
Okay, as long as it's not like coconut cream with sugar and it's just like the thick coconut cream part, if you use that, it was kind of what we were talking about before, you'll just end up with like a thicker, richer, fattier version. If you use light coconut, then you're running the risk. Yeah, okay, cool. I would use that personally. I would save the coconut milk for like a smoothie or something. Just because you already have broth, you know. I'm using Chowco today. I really like, this one has citric acid and sodium metabisulfite as a preservative in it. I really like, if you ever can buy Aroy D, coconut milk is really great because it has nothing in it besides coconut. And then any type of like organic one, like that Thai Kitchen one is great. Yeah, coconut cream, great. I would just say, like in general, you all probably know this because you're farmers, but like the fewer ingredients, especially like preservatives and stabilizers and weird things, the better, right? We're trying to like, we're already using an ingredient that comes from really far away in this recipe. And we're already using something that's processed. So like the less processed, the better, right? And if you don't have coconut milk, you can always take coconut flakes and put them in hot water. Blend them up in a blender with hot water and then strain it. You gotta squeeze as much of the milk out as you can, and you can get coconut milk that way. Or you can even use, one thing that I like to do is, if you wanna add creaminess without coconut, you could also do like soaked cashews or soaked almonds that you blend up in the blender. That's another way of adding some cream, again, without using like dairy products, which aren't bad. You can use that stuff too if you want, but this is just another way.
Winston, did you have a question?
Yeah, hi Meiko. Thank you for this class. It's been fun so far. I just had a question about like why we're sort of simmering like the carrots instead of cooking it with the onions in the beginning. Because I know in some soup recipes you like cook the onions and celery and carrots all like in the beginning. So I'm just curious to know the thinking behind that.
Oh, you're saying like, why wouldn't you cook all that stuff before you cook your onions?
No, like why not cook the onions, the carrots, and the celery in the beginning? Because right now like my hard root vegetables we're simmering them, which I think is cool. I'm just curious, like the thinking behind that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let me check my. So I'll answer in 1 second. My carrots are soft enough that like if I press them really hard with my spoon, they can break. So I'm gonna add the rest of my root vegetables and then keep on simmering all my vegetables. I just lost part of one. So, good question. Again, like with a lot, there's lots of different ways to do everything, and that's one thing I really like about cooking is there's so many different methods, right? Two things. So if I were to cook the carrots with the onions, I would probably cut them up a little smaller, like a little bit thinner so that they could cook without having liquid. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is I didn't really know what root vegetables all of you would have. So to just have like a catch-all category of like all root vegetables, then this is how you do it with the water. or with the broth was like an easy way to sort of like have one method for doing this. But yeah, if you could definitely cook the carrots with the onions, and you would probably get really good flavor from doing that. And if you were to do that, like I said, I would just cut them up a little bit smaller so that you would be able to do it without having to like add too much liquid, right? Basically, like with all that stuff, if I were to add the carrots and no liquid, it would have just stuck and it would have been a lot harder for them to like cook enough. So it was just like a way to speed up the process to like add the liquid to it at that point. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. I didn't end up having to add any more broth once I added the rest of my root vegetables. They're all still covered by my stock. So I'm just gonna keep on boiling. Things are boiling pretty hard, so I'm actually gonna turn my heat down a little bit so that, here's what mine looks like, so that everything simmers. If I cook on too high of a temperature with only a little bit of liquid, then all the water's just gonna boil off, right? And so that's why it's like cooking beans, right? You cook beans slow and like over low heat instead of like a rapid boil so that everything's boiling over. So I'm doing the same thing now with the rest of my vegetables. I'm just gonna cook everything on simmer. A simmer is like, you wanna be able to see the bubbles on the surface, but you don't want stuff like, you know, like going everywhere. And I'm doing this until everything gets soft. We are gonna add coconut milk, but now would be a good time to, if you want, to like take a spoon and taste your liquid. And if you want to add more seasoning, like more spices to it, or add a little bit more salt or some black pepper, or if it needs a little more heat, now would be a time. Just keep in mind that the coconut is going to change the flavor. And so I would be careful about adding salt right now just because, you know, things will change. But definitely for spices, this is a good time to add some more spices because you do want the spices to cook in with the vegetables. I think I mentioned in the notes that like, if you want to add dried spices or even herbs, we haven't really talked about herbs because we're adding fresh herbs at the end, but if you want to add some like dried thyme or oregano or something, now would be a good time to do that also.
Meiko, have you ever used egg yolks whisked into thickened broth?
Oh, you know, I have not, but it sounds wonderful. Do you have to, actually maybe I have when I've done like a rice soup. Do you temper the egg yolks? Like do you put them in a little bit of broth or do you just put them straight in with everything?
Kathy says, yep, temper.
Cool. Oh, that sounds great. I haven't done that, but I imagine that I think I've only done that when I've made like chicken lemon rice soup. But that seems like it adds like a nice like velvety mouthfeel.
Mm-hmm.
Good protein. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, like you do this with miso too. So when you add miso or if you're gonna add egg yolks to your soup, take a little bit of your broth out in a separate container. You put your egg yolks in or you put your miso paste in, you mix it all together, and then you add that back in. That way you don't have like a chunk of something like in the pot that you're trying to like break apart. And then also for things like miso, you don't want to boil it because a lot of the nutrients in the miso are killed like at that high temperature. So once you have miso, you always want to keep it under a boil.
Jacqueline's wondering if we should have added all our broth already, or only a little.
The easy answer is no. I told you to have 4 quarts as like a safety measure, and you really are just adding enough broth so that your vegetables can cook under the broth. So you might not have used all of it, and that's
cups, right? 4 cups. You said
Yeah,
four.
4 cups, and I'm sure that's probably way more than you needed. I'm curious to know how much people use. I used like 3 cups, but I also didn't measure my vegetables. So.
I have another question about this coconut stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you'll be able to see it. I mean, you said use the cream, so I've got this cream out, the 3/4 of a cup of just the really hard cream stuff.
Yeah.
Is this other stuff going to be any good to use now that I've taken away most of the cream?
That's a good question. Is it like clear underneath?
There's some clear. There's a little bit of cream left. I guess I could mix it up and see if it looks like it'd be
Yeah, it sort of depends on like what your other cooking plans or how like confident you feel that like you could find something to like use that for. I would say, so my coconut milk is thick, but it's not like solid. So again, it really just comes down to like a balance and like a ratio of your liquid to your fat. And so if you want to go with that thick stuff, just know that you're going to have a much like thicker broth than if you were to take like, I mean, it tastes great, right? Then if you were to take like some of the coconut water and some of the coconut cream. Again, you can use regular, if you were to use light coconut milk, it's not going to be very much different. Like I said, it's just going to be a different ratio of like, how thick and creamy it's going to be. That's essentially all we're like working with here.
Can you freeze it? Because I have like this huge.
Yeah. So, okay. So if you freeze it, what I've noticed is when you defrost it, sometimes it separates. And so just be prepared that like the texture might be a little different. And usually what I find is you stick it in the blender, it blends right back up, no problem. You end up with a nice creamy coconut milk, but it will kind of weird sometimes when you freeze it.
Okay, thank you.
And Janetta, Joe says that it's good in smoothies.
Oh, so I can just keep it and use it first. Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, Meiko, Joyce is asking for a friend. What's the cooking explanation for waiting to add all the broth? She's asking for someone who may or may not have accidentally added all the broth.
So basically, okay, so some of this has to do with like the difference between a soup and a stew, and it really just depends on like how thick it's going to be versus how soupy and like watery it's going to be. So the more broth you add, then the more spread out the flavor is, the more the less broth you have, it's just going to be like a thicker sauce, right? And so it just comes down to the amount of liquid. And that can really be, if you can't change the amount of liquid because everything's already in there, then what you do is you just adjust seasonings. So you add a little more salt, you maybe add a little garlic powder, you add some curry powder, right? If it's gotten too watery in terms of like your flavor. But that's really the only difference. And then the other part of that is like, if you were to make like a thick stew, maybe you'd want to eat it over rice versus let's say you made a version of this with all 4 cups of broth and then you add your coconut milk in and you end up having like, a lot more liquid to the amount of vegetables you have, and you just have a soup and it's just like a chunky soup, right? So it's really variable. These measurements that I gave in terms of like 3/4 of a cup of coconut milk can really be like, it can be adjusted up or down to your preference. And hopefully that doesn't feel like overwhelming to you. Hopefully this is like a way of being like, okay, here's one method, right? Of like saying, cook some seeds, sweat your alliums, add your vegetables, cook them with a little bit of broth, and then add something at the end that's going to, give it some more oomph, some more fat, which, you know, really tastes good. It really makes you feel kind of full. It makes you feel satiated as opposed to just eating like, you know, all vegetables and no fat. And then, you know, on top of that, then you can add like some lime juice and some this. It's just like, this is just a technique, and like the way you actually like do all the steps, the actual ingredients you use, you know, variety is endless. Like you can use whatever, right? This is just the winter version. Let me know if there's other questions. I'm going to add my coconut milk now, and I'm just using about a half of my can. I'm gonna turn a little bit so maybe you can see my pot.
Any thoughts on adding cilantro to this recipe?
Shoot, I forgot my greens. Oh, cilantro, yes. I would say in terms of cilantro, you can add it while you're cooking, or you can add it before you eat it. If you add it to your cooking, it's going to be less intense flavor, right? Just the same as like what we talked about with garlic or ginger. If you add fresh cilantro at the very end, like once you heat it up, like, well, now it's hot, but like if you were to reheat it and you would add it at the very end, once you're ready to serve, then it's going to be like a different, brighter flavor, right?
Yeah, and so if you're using kale or collards or other hardy greens, now would be a good time to add them like Meiko is doing. But if you're using...
You should have added them like before you add your coconut milk, but mostly, but it, you know, it also doesn't really hurt to like cook your coconut milk. I'm just, I usually stop cooking once I add the coconut milk because we're preparing food that's going to be reheated and I don't want to like overcook things. But there's no harm in like, let's say I want to eat this right now. I'm like, oh, I just added my greens and I forgot to before because I was too busy talking. And like, I'm worried about them being too tough. I could throw this on the stove for a little bit longer and let them cook till they're soft. But they actually don't look too hard.
Yeah, they were on the smaller side.
Yeah, even just the heat from the pot is like looking pretty good. So then, you know, I just want to show you the color of my stew right now. So obviously the more coconut milk I add, the lighter it's gonna get. And mine is pretty chunky and not very brothy right now. I'm gonna add a little more coconut and I'm gonna taste it. But yeah, cilantro would be great. If you had like scallions you wanted to add at the end, again, as like a finisher, that would be great. Sesame seeds, toasted sesame seeds put on top. I think I mentioned in the recipe, you know, this is like one version, but you can do so many different like flavor profiles for this.
Would now be a good time to add spinach?
Yes, now would be a great time to add spinach.
And you were saying that if folks are planning to reheat the stew, that they can turn off the heat now, but if you're eating it for dinner now, you could keep it going a little bit longer.
Yeah, if you're eating now, then just like make sure it's heated up as hot as you want it. And now, again, now is the time to adjust your seasoning. So if you want to add, now, once you have the coconut milk in, now is the best time to add salt if you need it, or like I said, more cayenne pepper, chili powder, curry powder, etc., etc.
Yeah, and as you guys are...
How everything's turning out for you, if you have any more questions.
Yeah, and also if folks want to take pictures of either where you're at now or the finished product and tag us on social media, either on Facebook or on Instagram, we'd love to see how it turned out for you guys. Any thoughts on lemongrass?
Yes, love it. I would treat lemongrass as like part of the ginger, garlic, fresh turmeric type of thing, right? I would like use the purple, white part, the inside part, chop it up, pound it. If you have a mortar and pestle, you can pound it with a little bit of salt and add it in that phase. Yeah, that would be my suggestion, would be to add it like that, you know, cook it a little bit. Oh, and the lime juice is for the very end. So when you're ready to serve, you just, you know, cut your lime in half and just squeeze your lime over the top. And it just adds a nice contrast because like the root vegetables, okay, it's like root vegetables are so starchy and they have some sugar in them, right? And they're kind of sweet. And then the coconut milk makes things sweet also. So the mushrooms kind of help to balance and the spices kind of help to balance, but you end up with something more on the sweet side, even if you have the heat from the chilies. So the lime juice is really good right before you eat it, again, just to balance all the flavors. If anyone wants to, I want to see what people came up with. Or if anyone had a really good combination that they liked, like I'm curious to know how the parsnip version went. I love that someone was using parsnips. But if you had like a mixture that you really liked using, or something that you want to try next time, like, feel free to shout it out.
Dion, that looks delicious.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, nice.
Winston, yours looks great too. Grace, very nice. Joyce said she added murasaki sweet potatoes and purple daikon.
Nice.
Jacqueline, let's see. Oh, that looks great.
Cool, I love it.
Great job, everyone. It's kind of like it'd be funny if we all did like a potluck. I mean, it's a pandemic, but like all
Hi,
these different
Winston.
variations. Oh my gosh, hi, Kelly.
Hi.
Wow, I know someone on here.
Josie. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, guys.
Wow, food really does bring people together. I love it. Thank you, Keep Going Detroit and Meiko for doing this.
Yeah, I put it in the chat earlier, but I've been having the view on like group view, and it's been really nice to see everyone kind of like moving about their kitchens and getting this dish prepared together but separately. I got you, Janetta.
You gotta come more. Everyone, this is Bibi. She's the chef here at Pink Flamingo To Go, and she's doing the dishes right now. But this is everyone from the class.
Yeah, Meiko, can you let us know how we can support Pink Flamingo and Guerrilla Food right now?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, we're doing takeout and deliveries every Friday. So every Monday we release a new menu for the week, trying to keep in line with like the seasonal stuff. And also it's kind of nice for us not to cook the same thing every week. So we post the menu on Instagram and on Facebook, and we have a website also. We actually have two websites, pinkflamingotogo.com. And we also, and then our other website is like for Guerrilla Food, and that talks about like our various projects, which I mentioned a little bit, and that's guerrillafooddetroit.com. I'll put it in the chat so you can like see how it's spelled. But yeah, through social media, or through our website would be the best ways to like see our menus. Pink Flamingo To Go. And we're on social media under Guerrilla Food and Pink Flamingo To Go. And like I said, Mondays are the day that we post the menus. And we do deliveries like basically throughout all of Detroit, and then up to like Royal Oak, Southfield, like the kind of like close suburbs.
Sweet. We had a question earlier that I thought would be good for the end of the class. I don't remember who asked, but what was the like inspiration and idea behind this recipe for this class?
Oh, so this is like sort of my default way of making soup. Not necessarily with these spices, but sort of like this process. Just because it's so easy and it's so flexible. And so I wanted to share it with you for that reason. I feel like, this time of year, when it's so dark and cold, it's nice to have really like grounding, warming foods. And of course, like these types of things are what's available if we're trying to eat local food, not the coconut milk, of course, but all the roots. And I guess like when I was thinking about what to make with you all, like I thought of like what was sort of like the most comforting and the most like the most accessible recipe that I could share, just in terms of like a method for how to do things. I really like being able to like improvise and like swap vegetables and like open the refrigerator and be like, what do we have, and like what can we make with all these random things. And so I feel like this is kind of a template for being able to do that type of cooking.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like recipes like this too, I mean, you won't really be making a winter stew in the summertime, but like recipes like this are really great for when you're like a CSA member, or when you have like tomatoes coming out of your ears, like peak tomato season, like recipes that are just super versatile. You can just look in your fridge and kind of like use whatever you have and throw it in and make some dinner real quick.
Make a great version with, oh yeah, look at that. You can make a great version with, see you, Jacqueline, with bell peppers, with fennel, right? With tomatoes, and even if you didn't have coconut milk, you put the tomatoes in while you're cooking all the other vegetables. So yeah, this is like a good kind of like throw everything in, mix them all together, and like the more the merrier type of situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Janetta says this was so wonderful, and I have to agree. And thanks, Janetta, for when you were sharing earlier, Janetta showed us her stew as well, and it looked really good.
Good, I'm so glad.
Yeah. Before we hop off, feel free to put any last questions in the chat. I also want to remind folks about a couple classes that we have coming up. We have the Beating Blight Tickets class coming up February the 13th. That's a Saturday at 1 o'clock. And then also, before, we were talking about mushrooms, and wanted to let you guys know that we have a growing mushrooms class on Wednesday, February 24th from 6 to 8 p.m. And you can sign up for both those classes on our website. You can also check out our previously recorded classes on our website. You can sign up for our February classes on our website as well. And yeah, this has been really fun. This was the first time that we did a class like this, and I think it went well. But I'm really hungry now. Next time, maybe I'll cook with you guys because it all looked really good.
Well, you can come pick some up from the restaurant tomorrow if you want.
Okay, I'm gonna take you up on that.
2 and 6.
And again, if you could, if you want to take pictures of the finished product, tag us on Instagram and Facebook. Tag both Keep Growing Detroit and Guerrilla Food and Pink Flamingo, all the tags. Cool. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Perfect. Thank you all. It was so good to cook with you all, and hope to see you this summer. But yeah, if not, you know how to reach me if you have any questions or ever want to ask anything about food and stuff. Like, we're always more than happy to talk about it.
Cool. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Wait.
Oh, what's up?
Do we add the rest of the broth? Like, cause I still have it thicker.
It's totally up to you. So like mine, I'll show you what mine looks, if you can kind of tell what mine looks like. So mine is like still kind of
Okay.
definitely more of a stew than a soup. And
Yes.
really is totally up to you. Like if you want to use more of the broth to make it thinner so you can just eat it like a soup, then go ahead. But if you want to keep it thick and like eat it over rice or, you know, just eat it as like in this form, it's totally your preference.
Okay.
Could you show
Thank you.
yours again, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna tilt my camera down. So I made mine pretty thick. This is actually thicker than I'm gonna keep it, but it's only because I made a batch earlier that's thinner. But like, here's what mine looks like. So mine's the squash, carrots, mushrooms, and daikon radish. And it's like all the vegetables are like not even fully covered by the liquid anymore.
Okay, thanks. See you later.
Welcome. See you later.
Janetta, did that help? Do you feel good about finishing up your stew?
Yes. Thank you so much, guys. This was like the best.
Oh, great.
All right. I have to go log off on my phone too.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.